In the early 90s, the most popular and competitive game genre was the platformer. And this was before the term platformer meant like 15 different things. It was as simple as run to the right and get to the finish. Though they all seemed similar at first, it was really difficult to find a platformer that stood out back in the day, and so many of them just died out without attention. To make a side-scroller shine, you needed two things: an interesting mascot and an intriguing graphical style. Sure, there was a bit more to it than that, but what it came down to is what would look good on a commercial and box. It's kinda sad, but fans in the 90s were even more shallow about graphics than we are now. But still, the gameplay was the main attraction, and Donkey Kong Country excels in all of these categories. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though, so as I replay the original Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, I'll try not to have a bias and look at it with no past experiences. Of course, that won't happen, but I'll give it a go. So if you can't tell, I'll be reviewing Donkey Kong Country, and I'll tell you whether it's worth playing today. So, let's get started. Alright, why don't we start off with the main selling point of this one? Yes, that is the graphics. But just for a split second, let me go over the main development cycle of the game. So, if you're not aware, it all started as an experiment with the Silicon graphics system, which helped create 3D models and was used for the Nintendo 64 a few years down the line. Rareware, the developers of this project, displayed what they had worked on to Nintendo. Nintendo was very pleased, enough to in fact buy half of the company. This was the beginning of the famous partnership between Rare and Nintendo, which led to some of the greatest games of that time period, including what was to become DKC. Rare employees pitched the idea to make it a Donkey Kong game, and Nintendo approved. They now assembled only a team of 12 developers, and the magic began. The Kongs went through many design changes until Rare found a modern look that would appeal to younger audiences. During this process, the decision was made to have DK be the grandson of the original Donkey Kong from the other games, and change Donkey Kong Jr. to a new character known as Diddy Kong, the nephew of the new DK. The game was finally released in 1994 to incredibly positive feedback from both critics and fans alike. One of the game's main selling points, as I mentioned earlier, was the pre-rendered 3D graphical style, which were pretty much revolutionary at the time. Sure, they're nothing too special now, but they were the closest we had to 3D back in the day, and if you say they still don't look good, you're most likely lying. They forced this in the marketing, even deliberately calling out Sega, saying no add-ons like the 32X or the Sega CD were necessary. It sold over 9 million units and is now ranked as the third best-selling Super Nintendo game of all time. You could tell how much effort they put into the graphics, and each sprite and background looks superb. The very high cost of the Silicon graphics technology paid off, and now Rare was a force to be reckoned with. If you saw their logo, you knew you got a quality game, and Donkey Kong Country was of course no exception. So, if you already cannot tell, monkeys like dem bananas, and the peeps who steal them are automatically classified as bad. That's basically the story when it comes to Donkey Kong Country, but I like the simplicity. It gets straight to the point and lets the gameplay shine, like many other platformers of that era. But to go a little more in depth, Donkey Kong has a giant hoard of bananas, which eventually becomes a staple of the future DK games. However, this stash of yellow fruit is stolen by the reptilian menace known as King K. Rool, along with his Kremling team. Cranky, the original Donkey Kong, breaks the news to DK and Diddy, and they set out on an adventure to regain their bananas. Now, I already have multiple questions, one of which being why a crocodile wants so many bananas, besides just trolling DK, but that doesn't really matter. And also, how in the world would DK eat all of those bananas anyway? I mean, it could just be a collection for show, but I would say that's a little excessive, I don't know. But I'm getting way off topic, so basically you're on an adventure and fighting reptiles. Also, you have a group of other Kongs to help you on your journey, consisting of Cranky, Candy, and Funky, but we'll get to that a little later. So let's move on. If you've played other 2D platformers, DKC will feel right at home, but there still are some unique features to this game. For starters, the controls are pretty simple though. Of course, the D-pad moves you in all two-dimensional directions, the B button jumps, and the Y button does this roll attack with both Kongs, and when held is the way to run. Also, when the Y button is pressed in unison with down on the D-pad, Donkey Kong in particular can use this pound move, probably well known from the Super Smash Bros. Series. I never really found it all too useful, but it can be used to find hidden collectibles in the ground, which I guess is kinda cool. When the A button is pressed, you can swap which character is in the front of the line, which can come in handy many times. The game introduced the tag team system, where you can play as one character at a time, but with the press of a button, you can switch. Of course, you have 2 hits. Let's say you're on a really challenging level. You can choose which Kong to put in front, therefore which one to die first. Let's say I really like to play as Diddy Kong, so I'll start as Donkey Kong on this difficult level so he can get hit first, so I can have Diddy for later on in the level. It's pretty cool stuff. One interesting use for the roll move is to roll off the edge and then jump at the very last second. This can help the process of acquiring collectibles in these very hard to reach spots. In addition, as I'm sure you can guess, Donkey Kong is slower than Diddy, but more powerful. Diddy is speedy, but is unable to defeat certain enemies, so basically he is weaker. I always still prefer Diddy Kong because the agile controls were always more fun to play with for me. What do you guys think? Alright, to summarize, the controls are pretty simple, but responsive and just how I need them. Anyone who played a Mario game would immediately catch on, but the new mechanics are still fun and fresh. Now that is out of the way, let's get on to the main meat of the game. Yes, the gameplay. So basically, Donkey Kong Country is your typical side-scroller where the main objective is to get from the start of a level to the finish. There are 6 worlds, not including the final one, which is just the final boss. What makes this game bold though? What makes it stand out? Well, I'm getting there, hold on. Each level contains tons of collectibles, including bananas, Kong letters, animal tokens, and extra lives. Bananas serve as the main collectibles, similar to coins in the Mario series, and 100 of them add up to an extra life. The letters that spell out the word Kong are scattered across each stage, and when all collected add up to, guess what, an extra life. And get this, if you get 3 matching animal tokens, you get taken to a minigame where you can get an extra life. What do you want me to say? You're going to need a lot of those lives though, as the game only gets more and more challenging. It's a pretty good difficulty spike, and it's quite surprising. Yet, that is one of the best parts of this game, the difficulty level. It's a perfect balance of trial and error and pure challenge. It keeps you coming back for more, and is honestly one of my favorite things about the series. Not only are there many collectibles in each level, but there are also a handful of bonus stages in these secret barrels, which definitely break up the action of the game and give it much more variety. This feature would only get better in future installments for me. Other barrels included are the regular barrels, which can roll and take out enemies, the DK barrels, which revive a Kong who has died and serve as a normal barrel when thrown, barrel cannons, which launch you out for some unique platforming, and checkpoint barrels, which save your progress halfway through a level, and much more. I never thought something as basic as a barrel would add that much more to a game, but leave it to Rare for that. That's not my job. Some notable enemies consist of zingers, wasps that cannot be killed by regular attacks and are used as common roadblocks in levels, claptraps, small kremlings that can be jumped on to be defeated, crushers, tough kremlings that can be exclusively killed by Donkey Kong, and Manky Kongs, who are apes who chuck barrels, which were obviously the inspiration for Lanky Kong in DK64. There's some pretty strange and diverse villainous bad guys to get in your way, who really add to the game. They just give DKC much more character, but that's only a piece to the puzzle of this gigantic masterpiece. Along your platforming journey, you will not go at it all alone. For starters, 3 other Kongs will assist you. The first one is Cranky Kong, who gives you tips at these little stands. It's pretty funny how they depicted the original Donkey Kong as this cliche old guy, but I guess they needed to make the new DK as young as possible, so this was the easiest way to show that. Next is Funky Kong, who allows you to jump into the Funky Barrel, which opens up the ability of traveling through all the worlds you previously visited. Lastly is Candy Kong, who saves your game and does a few mischievous things to say the least. I'll let you guys determine what that is supposed to represent. And now is a good time to mention the map screen in between levels is pretty linear, and the Kong spots only show up every so often. So getting a game over means going back to the last save point, which could be a few levels back. That is of course if you don't have emulators or an SNES Classic and stuff, which use save states. I always felt guilty using those, so if you really want to beat a game for real, use it the original way, trust me. Another unique feature to this game are the animal buddies. They are pretty much the equivalent of power-ups and appear from time to time throughout levels. These are rideable animals that make traversing levels easier, quicker, and pretty much more fun. There are 5 of them, including the all-famous Rambi the Rhino, On Guard the Swordfish, Winky the Frog, Expresso the Ostrich, and Squawks the Parrot. Even with some weird control styles, I enjoyed playing as all of them, and they instantly took many levels from good to great. There's so many other downright awesome mechanics in this game, and to be honest, I'm only scratching the surface at this point. While I'm on the topic of stages, DKC had some of the most original and interesting level design while being familiar all at the same time. Most levels had multiple routes and secrets, similar to the likes of, the classic Sonic games. Typically, if you found your way to the top of the stages, there were more collectibles and sheer platforming segments, but the bottom had more enemies and basic design. If you look at the layouts of many stages, you can truly see how intricate they are. The type of style allows levels to be traversed multiple ways and rewards players for getting better. If you play enough, you find ways to get around faster and more efficiently. There are many different styles of these stages, some of which follow consistent patterns, and others that are completely defiant. Jungle levels, water levels, cave levels, and snow levels usually have a distinct trait that makes them unique. Basically, they're all pretty much incredibly memorable. And how can I forget my favorite type of stage, the minecart ones? They are a nice change of pace and present a real challenge. They honestly rely on muscle memory, and I guess some people may not like that, but I think it's fine. My only real grudge with the game is that it seems some levels are difficult, but in a cheap way. I mean, I'm fine with a good challenge, but it seems certain parts of the game are just hard in a cheap way, and that can be quite annoying. Some levels you've never played before kind of require a death to understand what you're doing. Most games are like that though, so I guess I can't particularly critique it for that. And also, it could just be that I'm bad at analyzing game design correctly, but who knows at this point. When it comes to bosses, there really isn't anything all too noteworthy. They are probably the least memorable part of the game for me. Most of them are just your typical bosses in platforming games, where once you figure out the pattern of an opponent, it's really easy. However, the final battle with King K. Rool really stands out in my opinion. He moves often, which keeps you on your feet the entire time. The variety of that single boss is honestly a huge highlight towards the end of the game. The rest is fine, but play to the end for that, you'll know what I mean. Now, before we go, let's talk about the soundtrack, possibly one of my favorite parts of the game. Donkey Kong Country put composer David Wise on the map, and rightfully so. He's an amazing musician who would later compose many other games for Rareware. He has a specific style very similar to the likes of Grant Kirkhope. This OST in particular, though, was very impressive because not only did he show off he can make some darn catchy tunes, but he also practically mastered the ambient sound. This is one of the main things that makes this music so special and interesting compared to the other DK soundtracks, the atmosphere. Some of these tracks are so peaceful, and others are just downright immersive. The jungle themes really make you feel like you're rummaging through the deep forests. The water themes make you feel like you're submerged in the dark and mysterious oceans, and the cave themes give you the feeling of exploring the unexpectedness of rocky landscapes. It truly is a masterful soundtrack, and if you have the time, you should give it a listen. My personal favorite tracks are the title theme, Simeon Segway, DK Ivan Swing, Bonus Room Blitz, Aquatic Ambiance, Minecart Madness, Treetop Rock, Funky's Fugue, Fear Factory, and my favorite track, Gangplank Galleon. The entire soundtrack is amazing, so listen to all of them, but those are just my personal favorites. Check it out though, legitimately, it's really good. So, what are my final thoughts, no one asked? Well, when it comes to platformers in the 90s, it can't get much better than this in my opinion. The gameplay is timeless, the new features compared to other side-scrollers are all pretty much amazing, the graphics were a technical achievement when it came out, and it still looks pretty good. And the atmosphere is a nice touch as well. I had trouble coming up with a single criticism during this entire review. And though this series peaked in the next entry for me, this game is still one of my favorite Super Nintendo games and definitely is worth playing today. Don't let the slightly dated graphics of these games fool you, these are masterpieces. And the first one is still considered an absolute classic. Alright, so that wraps up the very first game review on my channel. I'm sorry if it may have seemed a little rushed at times and maybe even drawn out in others, but I'm still learning to write scripts for these type of videos, so I really don't know what I'm doing. And I plan to make more, as I've always wanted to do these, even dating back to the very beginning of my YouTube career. So I really hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one, folks. Bye!